speaking here because I took my pledge to become an American citizen very seriously. I was a Republican certified poll challenger at the TCF Center from November 4th to November 5th. I was one of the victims of harassment, discrimination, and intimidation by election workers while I was fulfilling my duty as a challenger. What the witness has shared are no conspiracy theories. Several times, election workers tried to remove me from the room with the false accusations that I was impeding their process. They were the ones who blocked me from seeing the ballots, and when allowed, workers would complain. An election worker was brought up to harass me with the base of being too close. However, among themselves, they didn't social distance. I explained to him that I was only following the chairperson's direction in and out. Somehow we got to the point that English was not my first language, and he implied that then I shouldn't be there. I told him that he was discriminating and that he was treating me like garbage. He went away. Later, poll workers whispered to each other and brought police officers to remove me. It was pretty intimidating having officers approaching me when I had not done anything wrong. I understood they were trying to do their job. I noticed an officer was Hispanic, and I talked to him in Spanish. They were being lied. The officer started backing up. I witnessed many Republicans being kicked out of the room, and it was scary. That is not the America I came to a few decades ago. They were mad, kicked out, and not replaced, even though they were Republicans outside to be allowed to enter. It didn't happen. Since I was not able to see the poll books and didn't have anything to compare with, I was legally advised to challenge every ballot. The workers got pretty upset about it and advised to their people not to stop the process and dismiss any challenge. I had pages of notes of ballots. Here I had an affidavit where I can prove you that I didn't see, we couldn't do anything. There were people entered with a 11900, and I took the time to check those people. They didn't allow me to challenge it. The names of the people are here. While the Democrats are dismissing the finding from challengers, if those people were alive and registered to vote, why they were manually entered? Why weren't the ballot boxes properly sealed by the workers? Several of them were unattended, and I had a list of those tables. Me and another challenger questioned why those boxes were unsealed. The election director proceeded to seal them. As an American citizen and on behalf of the people of Michigan, I'm here to demand that you remember you took an oath to defend the country from enemy, domestic and foreign. Remember, it is your moral, ethical, and lawful duty today to seek for an investigation on the chain of custody. Demand election integrity. Demand a detailed forensic audit. You can go into history as the heroes for doing something right for this country and bringing to light what is hidden, or as cowards who didn't have the courage to protect the election integrity. You will be remembered as those who took a courageous and political incorrect stand, or as dishonest people who side with the fraud. It is your choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator McDonald has a question.
I just want to say hi to Jasmine. Jasmine is a constituent of mine. How are you?
I'm good.
I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that every one of you had to go through this.
Polling manager in Fulton County, Georgia, told state legislators that while she was counting ballots, she came across a batch that were pristine. None had been folded and all appeared to be exactly the same. She says they could have been scanned copies.
My name is Susan Voiles.
Suzanne Voiles has worked as a poll manager for over 20 years. She told the Georgia Senate committee during a hearing Thursday about an odd batch of absentee ballots that caught her attention during the Georgia recount.
Most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, it was, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds.
Voiles said what first struck her about these ballots was the feel of the paper. She said when you have counted and held ballots for as long as she has, you know the feel of them, and compared it to knowing the feel of a genuine versus a fake dollar bill.
But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in.
She noticed that the markings on the ballots all looked exactly the same, with the white eclipse around the filled-in marking. Voiles had also previously written a sworn affidavit that 98% of the batch in question were for Joe Biden. The affidavit was included in Attorney Lynn Wood's lawsuit against the Georgia Secretary of State.
What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same.
And in the middle of the stack, Voiles said they found a single ballot that appeared to have been pulled from a printer or copier too soon because the image wasn't aligned properly on the paper. A state lawmaker questioned Voiles on whether the pristine nature of the ballots could be explained by the duplication process.
Well, couldn't that be explained by the fact that they were all personally replicated and duplicated with observation by individuals working that same poll?
Well, the probability of that, I would think, is very slight, because why would 98 ballots have that little white eclipse on the very first presidential ballot? Why would all of them be exactly the same? It was very easy to see that a ballot had been replicated many times.
She said it looked like the rest of the ballots were copies that had been marked by a printer or scanner, which could explain why the markings weren't properly aligned, leaving the white eclipse inside the bubble. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Be a fair process. It wasn't a fair process. It wasn't a fair process at all. And the tabulating problem with them running numerous ballots through these tabulators and just continuing to do it.
Can I ask you just one last question?
Sure.
Melissa? So how many ballots would you estimate in front of you that you observed were counted multiple times in the machine? Can you put a number to it, an estimated number?
At least 30,000.
At least 30,000. Okay.
I'm just saying the numbers are not off by 30,000 votes. So
I know what
are you
I
saying
saw.
that they're filling in?
I know what I saw, and I signed something saying that if I'm wrong, I can go to prison. Okay. Did you?
Again, my name is Anna, and I'm a resident and registered voter in Pima County. I volunteered as a poll observer on October 16th, and then I signed up to work as a poll worker on November 3rd in a neighboring precinct. Would you like me to just give you an overview? Is that what I'm doing? Yes, please do. Okay. Well, I wrote in because I was aware of some irregularities that happened while I was a poll observer, and some different activity that I just felt uncomfortable with on election day. So I'll go ahead and start with what happened on the day that I was an observer. Each table was given a bin to put these in, and these bins would then go to another area where they were being stacked up to be tabulated starting on October 22nd. Many of these had mistakes, or they were written in pencil, and the workers, as I went around, had questions on, is this a good ballot? Is this not? I was told by the gentleman that ushered me out of the place where I was supposed to be and said, you aren't supposed to talk to anyone. You do not communicate with them. If you have an issue or you see an issue, you need to go to the supervisor, which is at the front of the table, front of the room. So as I saw things, as I went around to each table, I would go to the supervisor and I let her know, they don't know what to do with this ballot. It's in pencil or blah, blah, blah. And she'd say, no, it's fine. It's fine. So as I went back to the tables where I saw these issues, under my breath, I said, you need to go tell her. You need to go talk to them about this. And so many of them said, what do I do with this ballot? It's in pencil. Oh, it's fine. It'll go through. Or it was, some people wrote over their ballot, over the little oval circle where they were supposed to mark. And those were put into a pile, a separate pile that would be called duplicates. Those duplicates then went to another table and were then taken to the room where I had been ushered out of. And there was one person, there was supposed to be a second person, and I said, is there a Republican at that table? Because I said, is there a Democrat and a Republican? And he said, well, we hope so. They have to, if they get here, but it'll just be, just be me, and hopefully a second person. So as I saw these ballots along this area that they marked as dupe, which I understood to stand for duplicates that were going to be fixed, they would then be taken to the table, to the room where I could see a glass, it was a glassed wall between us, and they were taken around to the other side to be dealt with. I didn't get to see that at that point. So when I left and the other person took over for me at 1 o'clock, I was there for 5 hours, I shared with her, I said, there's a lot of mistakes that are happening. They're not putting them in the order that they need to be in. So when they get folded, they become a duplicate because they can't be counted. The machine wasn't going to accept them, so it had to be then taken out of the pile and put into a duplicate. So when I left, the man who had ushered me out of the room, the first room, came to get me at 1 o'clock and walked me straight over to the front desk. And he said, I hope everything went well. And I said, well, my concern is not necessarily where I was. It was hard for me to watch 32 people by myself. But more concerning is when these ballots were opened in the other room. And so to give you kind of a sense of how it worked is the ballots, however they were collected, were brought into an initial area of the Office of the Elections in Pima County. And in that room, the envelopes were then opened up and the signatures were checked. So then they would go through a double door where they were then sent to the room that I was in, where there were as many people as I explained before, trying to put them in an order, not necessarily of where they were from, but how they came in. So let's just say there were maybe 200, 250 per box. I'm not sure, but they came from different zip codes, different areas. It was whatever was mailed in. And then those were then put aside to be counted after the 22nd. My concern was the amount of ballots that were considered to be problematic that were then leaving the area that I was in, going to a room where there were only supposed to be 2 people, and yet not even sure there was 2 people. So that was my experience as an observer that I shared. I thought that was concerning. The other thing is when I came back to drop off my ballot, I had to drop it off outside, and there was no longer a police officer, and we found out that it was because our mayor, I live in Oro Valley, but the Tucson mayor wasn't allowing a police officer in front of the office anymore because it was upsetting to people to come and vote. And so I asked the man, I have to put my ballot out here. And he said, yes. So I said, how can I be sure someone isn't going to come and take this big box? And he said, no, we're watching it. And I said, who's you? And it was him and an elderly woman who was about 85. I don't know, and I'm sorry, meaning that she looked fragile, and I don't know how that could be protected, but I was a little concerned about that. It did make it in because when I checked my ballot, it was counted. But another question is how do we know who we voted for? That's a separate issue, but my point is that I don't know if my ballot actually has the people that I voted for. And as I said, that's something separate from what I experienced there as an observer. As a poll worker, I was assigned to be a provisional ballot clerk, and that was on election day. And on that day, I had worked the primary in August, so I had an idea of who would come by, what the issues were. But this time, we had so many more people who needed a provisional ballot than we had been allotted to have in this one precinct. So that was concerning. But the people that came to me I had so many people who said, I didn't ask for a mail-in ballot. My wife isn't listed as an early ballot person, but I am. And those are the kind of people that we had a lot of. But secondly, I had people who had just moved here from other states, and most of them were from 2 apartment complexes. It was concerning because as we counted them, we probably had over 40 people who were in one apartment complex with one address who had moved here from other states that I began to turn away. I'd say, I don't know, within the hour, we were so busy that I took a break and went outside. And a gentleman with a yellow shirt said, hi, I'm with the Democratic Party. I'm here from California, and I'm here at this precinct specifically. I came from a Phoenix in Maricopa County, a precinct there, and we're here to help turn Arizona blue. And I don't know if just looking at me, he decided that he felt safe saying that to me. Maybe he assumed that I would be okay with that. I was shocked, and I said, oh, so what? He said, oh, I said, so what is your plan? What are you doing? And he said, well, I have lawyers on call to contact immediately if they don't allow them to vote, people to vote. And I said, well, there was a cutoff date. And he said, nope, every vote should count. So that made me nervous, of course, because I didn't know the law specifically, and I didn't want to do something that would cause a problem. So I thought, and he said, oh, I've only had to turn away, just a couple people were turned away, and I was able to help one person go back in. Well, that was probably sent to me because I was the provisional ballot clerk. So, of course, that was somebody that I had to take care of. So I went back in and thought, well, this is unusual. I'm concerned that somebody outside is going to be calling an attorney on something that I did because I said no. I sent somebody away and said, I'm sorry. I mean, if you don't have any proof that you've lived here or proof of having registered, I can't give you a ballot. So I called the recorder's office and explained this, and she said, well, you have to let them, all votes will count, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So at that point then, I had to call in to the recorder's office at every single ballot. And you have to understand, we ran out of spaces. So, I mean, we were at like 200. I'm sure you can check on this to be sure, but we were over the amount of ballots we had. But every time I called the recorder's office, they would ask me for their name and their date of birth. And when they would look that up, the person on the phone would say, okay, well, you can go ahead and let them vote. And so I was trying to find a constant that I could go by so that we could speed up the process. I mean, is it if they've moved here and they have this, and if they've moved here at a certain date, what is it? And they would not give me any constant. They just said, you just have to call for every case is different. So my concern and why I wrote in was that I had 2 people right after having a slew of people who came in from other states. wanting to vote without having been registered and allowed to vote per the recorder's office. I then had someone come in from Maricopa County and one from Pinal County. It just happened right after. And each of them, when I called in, they said, nope, you're going to have them go back to Maricopa County. And the other one will have to go back to Pinal. And I said, well, how is that this person from Wisconsin and this person from Michigan and this person from Kentucky was able to do that? And she put me on hold for a second and then came back and said, well, it's just that we have their records more accurately than we have for Maricopa. We just can't, we're not able to process a Maricopa County ballot. So I had to send them away. But then as other people were coming through, it made me question why that was happening. So I asked them, do you have information that will prove that you are a resident, that I can verify that you are registered to vote here? And they would pull out their card and it very clearly said that they were Republican. They had a voter card. So to test this theory out, I called the recorder's office and asked them, and they were denied. I had to deny them. And so I was in a frenzy trying to take care of all of these people, but I found that the discrepancy between every vote counts and only those that the recorder's office would allow was indicative of how they chose who they wanted to allow to vote. And there was a consistency in the voter preference that they chose. And that concerned me because by the end of the night, which was at 8:15, after we counted all of the votes and they got put in the box and we were waiting for someone to come get them, I'm in the car and the election was already counted for Arizona, which I found appalling. First of all, after working 15 and a half hours taking in votes, but the experience really led me to believe that it was not, there should have been a system that we could have followed, because I understood that registered voters ended on a certain date and you couldn't come in and vote, but I was having to allow people to vote that literally had just moved here within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they were all from two different, not all of them, I take that back. There was a large majority, a large percentage of people who had addresses from 2 apartment complexes. And the last thing is that I had a homeless man who came in with a registration. And the reason I know he's homeless is because I said, where do you live? And he said, he didn't speak English, and he said, I don't have a home, but when I was at a shelter, they registered me at the recorder's office. So when I called about it, and they said, well, he was probably registered to be in this precinct. I said, but he doesn't live here. And they go, well, it's anybody who was registered downtown can vote. And so I found that to be odd.